Ethan Hawthorne, the only child of real estate billionaire Charles Hawthorne, lived behind the golden gates of Hawthorne Manor. He wasn't born silent. Life forced silence into him. At age 10, Ethan witnessed the tragic car crash that killed his mother. Since that night, he never spoke again. Doctors called it trauma-induced mutism. His father called it a curse he couldn't buy his way out of. Charles tried everything: specialists, the best clinics in Beverly Hills, private therapists who charged more per hour than some people earned in a month. But Ethan stayed locked in his quiet world. For 10 years, no sound, no words, no hope. Until the day an accident brought someone unexpected into his life. Ethan's father, Charles, a self-made real estate titan, had all the money to buy solutions, but no way to reach his son. Behind closed doors, the billionaire's confidence crumbled daily. He had boardrooms full of men who feared him, but he couldn't get a single word from the boy he loved more than life. Some nights, Charles walked into Ethan's room after midnight and sat beside him, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's chest. He would whisper into the darkness, "Please, just say anything. Let me know you're still in there." But the boy never replied. Not since the night of the accident. 10 years earlier, a rainy night, a speeding truck, the screech of tires, and Ethan's mother was gone. He had been in the back seat when it happened, witnessed it, felt the car spin, heard her last breath. And something inside him broke. A voice that used to fill the house with laughter vanished forever, until fate, disguised as a limousine, a puddle, and a poor girl under a broken bus stop, prepared to rewrite Ethan's story. Detroit had a strange way of mixing beauty with pain. Some parts glowed with polished buildings and fresh-painted boutiques. Other parts, especially on the east side, whispered stories of struggle: cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, hungry children running barefoot through alleys. But it was also where you found some of the strongest hearts. Hearts like Amara Williams. At just 17, Amara carried more weight than most grown adults. Her grandmother, the only family she had left, had been diagnosed with a chronic illness, and their medical bills stacked up like skyscrapers. To survive, Amara worked jobs nobody wanted: cleaning stores, wiping tables, singing for coins at bus stops. She wasn't just singing for money, she was singing to stay alive. Her voice could melt ice, smooth, soulful, raw enough to tell truths people ran away from. Strangers stopped mid-walk when they heard her. Some cried, some smiled, all listened. But that day the rain fell too hard. It came suddenly, drumming against the tin roof of the old bus stop shelter like a warning from heaven. Amara clutched her backpack and stepped closer to the wall, humming softly to keep herself warm. Her jeans were soaked, her hair stuck to her face, but still she sang. Sorrow can rain, but hope remains. Her voice floated into the street, just as a sleek black limousine sped around the corner. A wave of dirty water splashed over her from head to toe. She gasped, shocked, stunned into silence. The limousine screeched to a stop. The back door opened sharply. Charles Hawthorne, dressed in a charcoal suit worth more than Amara's yearly income, stepped out with rage burning in his eyes. At his driver? No. At himself. At life. At the 1,000 problems he couldn't fix, including the one sitting quietly in the back seat. "Are you hurt?" he asked Amara immediately. She blinked, then smiled. A real smile. Warm, forgiving, gentle. "It's okay," she said. "Sometimes life throws water before it shows blessings." Charles froze. People didn't talk like that anymore. Not to him. Not in Detroit. Not with such light in their voice after being drenched by his car. From the back seat, Ethan lifted his eyes. He heard her, and for the first time in years, something inside him stirred. Charles insisted on paying her for the trouble, but Amara shook her head. "I don't need money for an accident," she said. "Just let me sing something for the boy in your car." No one had ever spoken that way before. People usually begged to meet Ethan out of curiosity or pity. They spoke about him, not to him. But Amara looked at him like he was human, not broken. Charles hesitated. Before he could decline, Ethan unexpectedly leaned forward. He wanted to hear her. Amara stepped closer to the door and knelt slightly to Ethan's eye level. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured. "I know silence, but I also know healing. So just listen, okay?" Then she sang, softly, tenderly, a melody about loss, forgiveness, and the courage to breathe again. Ethan's heartbeat slowed, his chest loosened. The voices screaming in his head quieted down. He closed his eyes. He felt something he hadn't felt in a decade. Peace. When she finished, he opened his eyes, watery, trembling. Amara smiled at him as if she could see the cracks in his heart and didn't fear touching them. Charles watched, stunned. Something was happening, something none of the specialists had ever achieved. This girl, with no degree, no lab coat, no polished reputation, had broken through Ethan's silence in minutes. He needed her close, and he needed her now. As the rain thinned and the limousine idled quietly, Charles found himself staring at Amara as if she had stepped out of another universe. "Who are you?" he whispered. Amara shrugged, brushing wet curls from her face. "Just a girl trying to make life a little less heavy." There was something disarming about her honesty. She wasn't intimidated by the suit, the wealth, or the car. She wasn't desperate or impressed, just present. And in that presence, Ethan's eyes followed her every move. Charles cleared his throat. "I want to repay you properly. Let me drive you home at least." Amara hesitated. People didn't offer rides in her part of Detroit. People didn't offer help without wanting something. But Ethan's soft gaze, wide, curious, vulnerable, convinced her. "Okay," she said gently, "but only because it's still raining." She stepped into the limousine carefully, water dripping from her clothes onto the polished floor. The scent of leather and cedar greeted her. She felt small in the massive space, but not unwelcome. Ethan sat across from her, hands tucked near his chest. Amara smiled softly at him. "You have beautiful eyes," she said warmly. "They look like they've seen a lot." Ethan blinked. His throat tightened, but no sound escaped. Still, he didn't look away. When the limousine pulled up to the small, worn apartment building where Amara lived, the contrast was almost painful. The building leaned slightly to the right, the paint was peeling, and a cracked window on the second floor was patched with cardboard. Charles looked stunned. "You live here?" he asked softly. Amara lifted her chin with quiet pride. "Yes. It's small, but it's home." Her grandmother, Ms. Ruth Williams, waited by the doorway, wrapped in a knitted shawl. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously when she saw the limousine. Before she could ask questions, Charles stepped out with a politeness that seemed foreign to him. "I'm sorry about the inconvenience today," he said. Ms. Ruth's expression softened only when she noticed Ethan stepping out shyly behind his father. "Oh, the Hawthorne boy," she murmured. "Poor child." Amara's heart tugged. Her grandmother had seen so much pain in the world she could recognize grief instantly. Charles awkwardly reached for his wallet, but Amara stopped him. "Please," she said firmly. "Money can't fix everything." Ethan flinched at those words, because he knew, better than anyone, how true they were. Amara reached out and gently touched Ethan's wet sleeve. "If you ever want to listen to music or just sit in peace," she said softly, "I'm always around this area. You can come find me." Ethan's breath hitched. Then Amara added something that made Charles blink in disbelief. "And if you want, I can talk to you again. No pressure, no fancy titles, just Amara." Something changed in Ethan's eyes. Not healing, not recovery, but possibility. That night, Charles paced his study like a man possessed. His staff watched from the hallway in silence. Nobody dared interrupt. He kept replaying the bus stop moment in his head, the way Ethan had leaned forward, the calm on his son's face, the small spark in his eyes that had been dead for years. He turned to his assistant, Margaret. "Find her." "Sir? She didn't give her number?" "Then look. Ask around. I don't care how, just find her." Margaret nodded and hurried off. Within 48 hours, Amara received a knock on her apartment door. It was Margaret, standing stiffly with a polite smile and a formal envelope. "Mr. Hawthorne is requesting your presence at the manor." Amara blinked. "My presence? Why?" "For his son." Amara's heart fluttered for reasons she couldn't explain. She looked at her grandmother, who nodded slowly. "Go on, child. God put some people in your path for reasons you don't see yet." Amara left with her backpack slung over one shoulder and stepped into a world she never imagined entering. Hawthorne Manor was massive, so massive that it made Amara dizzy just walking inside. The ceiling stretched high with chandeliers shaped like falling stars. Every surface gleamed, glass, marble, gold. Paintings of the Hawthorne lineage stared down from the walls, proud and cold, yet beneath all the beauty, the air felt heavy, too quiet, too still. She immediately understood why. This wasn't a home. It was a museum of grief. And at the center of it stood Ethan. He wore a white shirt, his posture rigid, his eyes thoughtful but distant. When he saw her, his lips parted just slightly in recognition. Amara smiled. "Hey, you!" Ethan blinked twice, his version of a greeting. Charles stepped forward with a meticulous formality. "Thank you for coming, Amara. You don't have to thank me," she interrupted gently. "Just tell me what you need." Charles swallowed. He was not used to being interrupted or spoken to so casually, but somehow it didn't offend him. He gestured toward Ethan. "I want you to spend time with him, not as a therapist. Just be someone he can trust." Amara looked into Ethan's eyes, the sadness, the loneliness, the fragile hope. Then she nodded. "Okay. I'll stay as long as he wants me here." Ethan's breath trembled, and in the smallest motion, so small even Charles almost missed it, Ethan reached toward her hand, not touching. Just reaching, like a boy who had been drowning for 10 years and suddenly saw the shore. Over the next days, Amara became a quiet, meaningful presence in the manor. She arrived every afternoon after school. She walked through the garden with Ethan. She told him stories about her childhood, her dreams, the music she wanted to create. She sang for him, soft melodies that touched the broken corners of his mind. She didn't treat him like a patient. She didn't ask him to speak. She didn't force anything. She simply existed beside him, warm, human, and unapologetically real. And Ethan responded. The staff watched in awe as he began, showing small smiles, humming under his breath, handing Amara books, sitting beside her rather than across the room, sketching simple drawings to express emotions. Charles couldn't believe the transformation. One evening, he stood at the doorway, watching Amara teach Ethan a simple rhythm by tapping on the table. Ethan was focused, deeply, joyfully focused. Charles felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. But healing is never simple and never painless. Something much deeper was waking inside Ethan, something that Amara would soon uncover, something tied to the last word he spoke before silence took him, a word he hadn't allowed himself to say again for 10 years. Mom. A week passed, then another. Amara became a part of the manor the way sunlight becomes part of a room, quietly, naturally, without forcing its way in. To Ethan, she was no longer just the girl from the bus stop. She was a presence, a rhythm, a breath he didn't know he'd been missing. But with every step he took toward healing, something dark and buried tugged at the edges of his mind. Every night, he woke sweating, heart racing, eyes wide with terror. No words came out, just a silent scream trapped behind his ribs. Charles had heard these nightmares for years, but something had changed. Something important. Now, after each nightmare, Ethan didn't curl into a corner. He didn't shut down. He walked quietly to the living room and waited for Amara, even when she wasn't scheduled to come, even when she didn't know he needed her. He sat there like a child sitting beside a locked door, hoping the one person who made the darkness less terrifying would eventually walk through. One evening, Amara entered the manor humming a slow tune, a song she had written for her grandmother. Ethan heard the melody before he saw her. He turned his head, eyes lighting up in quiet recognition. "Hey," she greeted. "I brought something for you." She pulled a small, old-fashioned MP3 player from her bag, scratched, taped, held together by love rather than money. "This is my grandmother's," Amara said. "She used it when she couldn't sleep. I loaded a few of my songs on it." She placed it gently in Ethan's hands. "I want you to have it. For your nights." Ethan froze. Gifts made him nervous. People always gave him things, toys, books, expensive gadgets, expecting reactions he could never give. But this gift was different. It wasn't about money or charity or pity. It was something from her world, the world she worked so hard to survive in, and she gave it to him without expecting anything in return. Slowly, Ethan touched his chest with his free hand. A gesture Amara had learned meant, "Thank you." She smiled. "You're welcome." Then she added softly, "Do you want to take a walk in the garden?" Ethan nodded. Not just nodded, leaned toward her like a sunflower turning toward the light. The Hawthorne garden was breathtaking, acres of sculpted shrubs, fountains, magnolia trees, marble statues, and winding pathways lined with roses. But it wasn't the beauty that made the air feel heavy. It was the memories. Amara didn't know it yet, but the garden was where Ethan's world ended 10 years ago. The bench where they sat was the same bench where he had waited for his mother the night of the accident. Waiting, watching through the rain, hoping she'd walk through the gate smiling like always. She never did. As they walked, Ethan's steps slowed near a tall magnolia tree. His breathing changed, shallower, unsteady. Amara noticed immediately. "You okay?" she asked gently. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes locked onto something she couldn't see. A memory, a ghost, a shadow from a night that had carved him into silence. His hand trembled violently. Amara stepped closer, her voice a soft whisper. "Ethan, I'm right here." He squeezed his eyes shut. Tears, sudden, sharp, rolled down his cheeks. His breath hitched, his chest caved inward. Amara didn't know it, but she was watching trauma break its own dam. She reached out, gently placing her hand over his. "Let it out," she whispered. "Whatever you're feeling, let it out." Ethan fell to his knees, not from pain, but release. For 10 years he had swallowed his fear, his grief, his guilt. Now it poured out of him in wordless sobs, Amara knelt with him, one hand on his back, grounding him, giving him a voice without forcing words. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Grief had its own timeline. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were glassy and red. Something was changing. Something big. Amara wiped his tears gently with her sleeve. "You're safe," she whispered. "I promise." Ethan stared at her intensely, as if trying to memorize her face in case she disappeared. Then, his lips parted, just slightly. His tongue trembled. His throat moved. Amara froze, breath caught in her chest. She didn't dare blink. And then, a sound. Raspy, fragile. It broke the air like a tiny crack in a wall built too high. "Mom?" The word drifted out like a ghost. Barely audible, but real. Amara's heart lurched. Her eyes widened. Her breath wavered. She had just heard the first word Ethan had spoken in 10 years. Behind them, Charles had stepped quietly into the garden. He had come to check on them, unaware he was walking into a miracle. He froze. The shock on his face was indescribable. His briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the marble path with a thud. "Ethan?" he whispered, voice breaking. "Ethan, you spoke." Ethan didn't turn toward his father. He kept staring at Amara, tears flowing again. "Mom." It was the only word he had the strength to say. The word that lived at the core of his trauma. The night that defined him. Amara cupped his face gently. "Ethan, it's okay," she whispered. "It's okay to miss her. It's okay to love her. And it's okay to speak again. You're not alone." Ethan collapsed into her arms, trembling, sobbing openly. Amara held him like a sister, a friend, a healer. Charles fell to his knees a few feet away. He covered his mouth, tears streaming silently down his face. He had begged for 10 years to hear his son speak. He had paid millions trying to restore that voice. But in the end, it wasn't money, medicine, or therapy that broke the silence. It was a girl from the east side of Detroit with nothing but a heart full of compassion and a voice full of truth. Later that night, Ethan sat with Amara in the music room. He didn't speak again. The word "mom" had drained him completely, but his eyes looked different. Lighter, freer, as if saying it had loosened the chains around his soul. Amara played a soft melody on the piano. Ethan listened, his breathing steady now. Charles watched from the doorway, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, his son wasn't a ghost in his own home. Amara had unlocked the first door. But the journey ahead would be long, and full of secrets neither of them knew yet. A secret buried in the accident. A truth Charles had never told Ethan. A truth Amara would soon uncover. A truth that could either heal Ethan completely or destroy everything. Amara became a part of the manor the way sunlight becomes part of a room. Quietly, naturally, without forcing its way in. To Ethan, she was no longer just the girl from the bus stop. She was a presence, a rhythm, a breath he didn't know he'd been missing. But with every step he took toward healing, something dark and buried tugged at the edges of his mind. It's okay to miss her. It's okay to love her. And it's okay to speak again. You're not alone. Ethan collapsed into her arms, trembling, sobbing openly. Amara held him like a sister, a friend, a healer. Charles fell to his knees a few feet away. He covered his mouth, tears streaming silently down his face. He had begged for 10 years to hear his son speak. He had paid millions trying to restore that voice. But in the end, it wasn't money, medicine, or therapy that broke the silence. It was a girl from the east side of Detroit with nothing but a heart full of compassion and a voice full of truth. Later that night, Ethan sat with Amara in the music room. He didn't speak again. The word mom had drained him completely, but his eyes looked different, lighter, freer, as if saying it had loosened the chains around his soul. Amara played a soft melody on the piano. Ethan listened, his breathing steady now. Charles watched from the doorway, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, his son wasn't a ghost in his own home. Amara had unlocked the first door, but the journey ahead would be long and full of secrets neither of them knew yet. A secret buried in the accident. A truth Charles had never told Ethan, a truth Amara would soon uncover. A truth that could either heal Ethan completely or destroy everything. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep with Amara's MP3 player beside him, Charles sat alone in his study. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a desk lamp. Papers were scattered everywhere, therapists' notes, medical reports, invoices from the best trauma specialists in the country, but none of them mentioned the truth. None of them spoke of the one thing Charles had never told his son. He stared at an old photograph on his desk. His wife, Elena Hawthorne, smiling brightly with Ethan in her arms on his 5th birthday. The memory stabbed him like a blade. He sank into his chair, head buried in his hands. "Why didn't I tell him?" he whispered to the empty room. Because the truth was ugly. Because guilt was a prison. Because he feared losing the only family he had left. But now Ethan was remembering. Now he was speaking again. Now the past was rising like smoke. Charles feared one thing. When Ethan uncovers the full truth about the accident, would he ever speak to him again? Over the next few days, the atmosphere in Hawthorne Manor changed. The staff smiled more. The halls felt warmer. Even the garden seemed greener. All because of Ethan. All because of Amara. Ethan wasn't talking fully yet, but everything about him was different. He initiated eye contact. He hummed melodies Amara taught him. He touched the piano keys gently, a silent question in his fingers. He walked with purpose, not like a shadow passing through rooms. He even sat with his father during breakfast, something he hadn't done in years. Charles watched all of it, stunned and grateful. But he also felt something else. A growing fear that the fragile progress could crumble if the past was revealed too soon. Amara, meanwhile, continued coming every afternoon. She sang with Ethan in the music room, read stories with him in the library, and walked beside him in the garden. Slowly, Ethan began trying to communicate, not with sentences, not yet, but with gestures, hums, simple sounds, tiny miracles. One afternoon, as Amara finished singing a soft melody, Ethan tapped the piano keys twice. She smiled. "You want me to sing that part again?" He nodded. He nodded. For the first time since the accident, Ethan was making clear requests. Amara beamed with pride. "You're getting stronger," she whispered. "I see it. I hear it." Ethan lowered his head shyly, cheeks tinted pink. And Amara knew. This wasn't just healing. This was trust. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening. The sky had turned purple, and the manor glowed softly under the garden lamps. Amara and Ethan were sitting under the magnolia tree, sharing warmed pastries the cook had left for them. Amara was talking about her dreams, becoming a real singer one day, recording an album, traveling outside Detroit. Ethan listened closely, eyes full of admiration. "You know," Amara said, "your eyes light up when you're happy. That's how I know you understand everything I say." Ethan's fingers twitched. He took a deep breath, then, very softly, "I like your voice." Amara froze. Her heart slammed into her ribs. Ethan blinked, terrified he'd said something wrong. She leaned forward, touched his hand gently, and whispered, "Ethan, you spoke a sentence." He swallowed. It was shaky, breathless, barely above a whisper. But it was a complete thought. Tears pricked Amara's eyes. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "So proud." Ethan exhaled shakily, relief flooding through his body like warm rain. From the balcony above, Charles had been watching without meaning to. He had come out to call them for dinner. Instead, he witnessed a miracle. His hand gripped the railing, knuckles whitening. My boy is coming back," he whispered. But even as joy filled him, fear clawed at his ribs, because Ethan was remembering. And when memories return, the truth follows. Later that night, while Ethan slept peacefully for the first time in years, Amara found Charles sitting alone in the glass-walled sunroom. The rain tapped softly against the ceiling. The air felt thick with unspoken words. Amara approached quietly. "Are you okay, Mr. Hawthorne?" He looked up, eyes tired and red. "You've done something no one else could do," he said. "You brought my son back." Amara shook her head softly. "I didn't bring him back. Ethan chose to come back. He's fighting." Charles swallowed hard. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that made Amara shiver. "You remind me of Elena, Ethan's mother." Amara's breath caught. Charles continued. "She was kind like you, gentle. She could walk into a room and make everyone breathe easier." "Ethan adored her more than anything." He paused. "When she died, I lost him too." Amara sat beside him, voice soft. "What happened that night?" Charles looked away sharply, as though she'd touched an open wound. "I can't tell him," he whispered. "Not yet. Not when he's finally healing." "Tell him what?" Amara pressed. Charles shook his head, eyes filling with dread. "Some truths break people, and he's just beginning to stand again." Amara didn't push further, but deep down, she felt the truth lurking like a storm on the horizon. Whatever Charles hid, it was tied to the accident, tied to Ethan's silence, tied to the word Mom. And it was only a matter of time before Ethan remembered everything. Ethan and Amara were in the garden again. She played a simple rhythm on her phone, a beat she'd made at home on free music software. Ethan listened, head tilted gently as if decoding the emotion inside the sound. Then, something strange happened. His breathing changed, rapid, unsteady, fearful. Amara frowned. "Ethan!" He squeezed his eyes shut. A memory hit him, hard, sudden, uncontrolled. A road, rain, screams, glass shattering, his mother shouting his name, and a voice he didn't expect, his father's, shouting something he had forgotten, something he had buried. Amara's heart began to race as she watched him tremble. "Ethan, talk to me. Tell me what you're seeing." He gasped, his lips parted, and in a whisper that made Amara's blood turn cold, he said, "It wasn't an accident." Amara froze. Ethan collapsed against her, shaking uncontrollably. Charles ran toward them from the house, panic etched across his face. Amara looked at him, horrified. "Mr. Hawthorne, what does he mean?" Charles stopped dead. Rain began to fall. Ethan clung to Amara like he was drowning, and the truth Charles had buried for a decade, was finally clawing its way to the surface. It wasn't an accident. Rain began to fall harder, tapping the magnolia leaves like anxious fingers. Amara held Ethan close, one arm wrapped securely around him while his entire body shook with terror. He clung to her shirt like a child clutching the last piece of something safe. Charles approached slowly, his face pale, almost ghost-like. Amara's voice trembled as she looked at him. "Mr. Hawthorne." Ethan said something about the accident. Charles inhaled sharply. Ethan lifted his head just enough to look at his father. His lips quivered, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. And then, barely audible, he whispered again, "It wasn't an accident." Lightning flashed in the sky. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. Charles closed his eyes as if the words physically stabbed him. "Ethan," he whispered, voice cracking, "please, not now." But trauma doesn't wait for permission. Memories don't ask if you're ready. They erupt when the mind can no longer contain them. Ethan buried his face against Amara's shoulder. His breath came out in short, painful bursts, almost hyperventilating. Amara held his cheeks gently and spoke with soft urgency. "Ethan, look at me. You're safe. You're safe. I'm right here." His eyes met hers, dark pools of a frightened child trapped in a grown boy's body. She wiped his tears. "Tell me what you remember, if you can." He tried. He opened his mouth, but only broken, stuttering pieces came out. "Mom! Screaming! Car! Spinning! Dad! Shouting! Stop! Please stop!" Charles stumbled backward as if struck. "No," he whispered. "He's remembering too much. He's not ready." Amara turned sharply toward Charles. "Then tell him the truth," she snapped. "He thinks he's going crazy." Charles shook violently. "I can't," he said. "If he knows everything, it might destroy him." Amara stepped closer, rain soaking her hair and clothes. What could be worse than him living in confusion and terror? Charles looked up at the sky, rain running down his face like tears he wouldn't allow himself to cry. "The truth could make him hate me." Silence fell over the garden, a silence heavier than the storm. Charles sank onto the stone bench, hands trembling. Amara helped Ethan sit beside her, one arm still wrapped around him. She looked at Charles with steady eyes. "Tell him," she whispered. "Tell us." Charles swallowed hard. "My wife and I, we fought that night." Ethan's breath hitched violently. Amara felt him tense. Charles forced himself to continue, voice cracking. "We had a party earlier that evening. She drank more than usual. We argued about leaving. I told her she shouldn't drive. I begged her not to." He shut his eyes tightly, haunted. "She took Ethan with her. I thought she was just going around the block to clear her head, but she drove toward the freeway." Ethan gasped, grabbing Amara's hand. Charles pressed his shaking fingers to his forehead. "I called her. I told her to stop the car. I told her she was scaring me. I yelled." His voice broke. "God help me," I yelled. The rain grew heavier, and while I was shouting at her, she lost control. Amara's eyes widened. She was on the phone with you?" Charles nodded miserably. "I heard the crash through the speaker." Lightning illuminated all three of them. "That's what Ethan remembers," Charles's voice cracked. "He heard us fighting. He heard me yelling. And he saw her die." Ethan shook violently, covering his ears, but Amara held his hands firmly, forcing him to keep his eyes on her. "Listen to me," she whispered fiercely. "That wasn't your fault. That wasn't your responsibility. You were a child, Ethan." Ethan whispered something barely coherent. Amara leaned closer. "What did you say?" His lips trembled. "Mom, she looked at me. Before the car flipped." Amara's heart shattered. "She told me. Ethan, hold on." He broke down, sobbing painfully. Charles covered his mouth, falling forward in agony. "I'm sorry," he cried. "I'm so sorry. I've carried this guilt for 10 years. I didn't want you to remember. I didn't want you to blame me." Ethan lifted his head slowly, his voice, every word trembling. "Dad, I never blamed you." Charles froze. Rain stopped falling for a moment. Ethan continued, barely above a whisper. "I just didn't know how to breathe without her. Charles collapsed into tears. For the first time in 10 years, father and son were feeling the same pain at the same moment in the same place. A wound finally open, a wound finally ready to heal. Amara held Ethan's shaking hands. "Ethan, look at me." He did. "You survived something unimaginable," she whispered. "You don't have to be strong alone anymore. You have me. You have your father. You have a voice now, and it deserves to be heard." Ethan leaned into her, tears wetting her shoulder. Charles whispered, broken, How did you do this? How did you reach him when no one else could?" Amara shook her head softly. "I didn't heal him," she said. "He trusted himself enough to speak. I just made space for him to feel again." Charles nodded slowly, humbled. Amara turned to Ethan again. "You said something important earlier, that it wasn't an accident." Ethan sniffed, nodding slowly. Amara wiped his face gently. "That doesn't mean your father wanted anything to happen. It means something happened that left all of you shattered. But you're here now. You're alive, and you spoke the truth without breaking." Ethan looked at her with such raw gratitude that Charles had to look away. Amara whispered, "You are stronger than your silence." And Ethan's breathing slowed. Steady, calm again. The storm inside him had released. The truth was out, and the real healing could finally begin. Later that night, after the storm had passed, the three of them stood quietly in the hallway of the manor. Ethan, exhausted, leaned against Amara's side. Charles looked at his son the way a drowning man looks at air. "Ethan," he whispered, "can I hold you?" Ethan hesitated. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his father. Charles broke down instantly. 10 years of guilt, grief, regret, and hope poured out of him. Ethan whispered softly into his father's shoulder, "I'm here, Dad." Just 2 words, but they were everything. Amara watched, tears falling, knowing she was witnessing a moment so sacred it didn't belong to the world. It belonged to them. And yet, this was not the end. It was only the bridge to a new chapter, one where Ethan would face the world again, one where Charles would rebuild his relationship with his son, and one where Amara would soon find her own life changing in ways she never imagined. Because word of Ethan's breakthrough was about to spread, far beyond the manor, far beyond Detroit, to a world that would soon come knocking, wanting to know the girl who healed a billionaire's silent son. 3 days passed, 3 quiet, tender, miraculous days. Ethan spoke small things, soft words, short sentences. Not often, speaking still tired him, but he spoke, to Amara, to his father, to himself in the mirror sometimes, as if rediscovering his identity one fragile word at a time. It was progress no one dared imagine, but progress, like light, cannot stay hidden. On the 4th morning, Hawthorne Manor woke to chaos. Reporters, camera crews, helicopters circling overhead, news vans blocking the private driveway. Charles's head of security rushed into the dining room. "Sir, the press has formed a blockade outside the gates. Somehow, someone leaked the story." Charles's face drained of color. "What story?" The guard swallowed. "That your son spoke again. That a girl from the east side helped him." Ethan stiffened, fork slipping from his hand. Amara froze mid-step, plate in hand. Charles slammed his palm on the table. "Who leaked this?" The guard shook his head. "We're investigating, sir, but the story is everywhere." He handed Charles a tablet. Headlines glowed on the screen. "Billionaire's muted son speaks after 10 years. Healer is teenage girl from inner city." "Who is Amara Williams?" "The girl who brought the Hawthorne heir back to life." "A miracle in Detroit?" Trauma boy breaks silence thanks to local singer. Charles closed his eyes in horror. Ethan trembled violently. His breathing quickened, his fingers curled into fists. Amara rushed to him immediately, kneeling beside his chair. "Ethan, look at me," she whispered. "You're safe. You're right here." He stared at her, tears forming. "No cameras," he whispered shakily. "No noise." Amara squeezed his hands gently. "They can't touch you. I won't let them." Charles took a shaky breath. "This is my fault," he muttered. "I should have anticipated this. I should have protected him." But even he couldn't have predicted how fast the world would latch onto a miracle story. Ethan pressed his forehead against Amara's shoulder, seeking shelter. "Make it stop," he whispered. Amara wrapped her arms around him. "I will." She didn't know how, but she meant it. While security tried to push back the reporters, Amara's phone buzzed non-stop. Neighbors, classmates, people she hadn't spoken to in years. "Girl, is this really you on the news? Are you working for the Hawthornes? You're famous!" Her grandmother, Ms. Ruth, called twice. Amara stepped into the hallway and answered breathlessly. "Grandma, are you okay?" Her grandmother exhaled softly through the receiver. "I am, baby. But the street outside is full of people. Reporters. They've been knocking on the door asking about you." Amara's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered. "This wasn't supposed to happen." Ms. Ruth's voice softened. "Baby, good things aren't always quiet, but you stay strong and stay true." "That boy, he needs you." Amara swallowed tears. "Yes, ma'am." She hung up, breathing hard. The lines between their worlds, wealth and poverty, power and struggle, were dissolving fast, and things were only going to get messier. That afternoon, Charles asked Amara to meet him in his study. The room was dim and full of tension. He stood by the large window, hands folded behind his back. She entered nervously, wondering if he was angry, or grateful, or scared. He turned to her slowly. "Amara, you've changed my son's life." She blinked. "Sir, I didn't do anything special." Charles raised a hand gently. "You did what an army of experts couldn't. You gave him back his hope, his voice, his future." He took a deep breath. "I want to help you, not out of charity, out of respect, out of gratitude." Amara hesitated. "What do you mean?" Charles walked toward his desk and picked up a folder. "This is a full tuition scholarship," he said, "to the Detroit School of Performing Arts." Amara gasped. "But I can't. That's just the beginning." Charles opened the folder. "I want to cover your grandmother's medical bills, all of them. And I want to hire you officially, under a real contract, to continue helping Ethan." Amara stared at him, stunned. I don't know what to say." Charles softened. "Say you'll let me do something good for the girl who saved my boy." Her eyes filled, but before she could answer, a soft voice came from the doorway. "Amara." They both turned. Ethan stood there, shy, fragile, but speaking. He walked toward her slowly. "I want you to stay." Amara's heart squeezed dangerously. Ethan continued, voice trembling. "Not because of healing, but because you're the first person who makes the world quiet." Charles looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Attachment, trust, connection. Ethan needed her, not as a therapist, not as an employee, but as the person who held the key to his voice. Amara wiped a tear. "Ethan, I'm not going anywhere." Ethan exhaled shakily, relief flooding him. That night, Amara stayed for dinner at Charles's insistence. Ethan sat beside her the entire meal. He touched her sleeve when he wanted something. He whispered tiny words meant only for her. He even laughed, sweet, soft, broken laughter, at one of her stories. And Charles watched. A storm brewed quietly inside him. Not anger, not jealousy, fear. He needed Amara. Ethan needed her even more. But what happens when a broken heart begins to depend too deeply on the one person who soothed its wounds? Even Amara felt it. A heaviness growing between them, a closeness that was no longer simple, no longer innocent, no longer just healing. Something was forming, something delicate, something dangerous. Ethan looked at her throughout dinner like she was a lifeline, and she wasn't sure if she was prepared for that weight. When she stood to leave later that evening, Ethan followed her to the hallway. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he whispered. Amara touched his cheek gently. "Yes, always." He leaned into her hand, a gesture so intimate that it shook her. Then he whispered, "Your voice saved me." Her heart trembled. "Ethan, you saved yourself. I was just here." He shook his head softly. "No, you made the silence less scary." Amara swallowed. "Then I'll keep doing that, as long as you need me." Ethan nodded, but as she walked away, Charles stepped forward with a quiet warning. "Amara." She stopped. "Be careful," Charles said quietly. "My son attaches deeply. When someone reaches his heart, they become his whole world." Amara froze. Charles continued, voice heavy. "And if that person ever leaves, it will break him all over again." Amara's breath caught. Because she wasn't sure anymore. Not anymore. If she had the strength to walk away from Ethan Hawthorne. That night, as Amara left the manor, she saw the reporters still waiting outside the gates, cameras flashing. Her face appeared on a giant screen mounted on the side of a news van. Her name echoed through the crowd. The world wanted the girl who healed the billionaire's silent son, but the world never loves quietly. It consumes, it pulls, it demands. And soon, the pressure from the outside world would collide with the fragile healing happening inside Hawthorne Manor, threatening everything Ethan, Charles, and Amara had rebuilt. This was only the beginning, and destiny was just getting started. As Amara stepped away from the gates that night, the noise of the world roared behind her, cameras clicking, reporters shouting, headlines flashing her name. But she didn't look back. Her eyes stayed forward, toward the empty street, the soft hum of the city and the quiet truth blooming inside her chest. Ethan had spoken again. Ethan had remembered. Ethan had healed enough to breathe without fear. And for the first time in a decade, Charles saw a future where his son wasn't defined by silence, but by strength. Nothing about their lives would be the same after that night. Not Ethan's voice, not Charles's heart, not Amara's purpose. But sometimes endings aren't meant to close a story. Sometimes they are meant to open a new one. The boy who hadn't spoken in 10 years finally whispered his own beginning. And the girl who had nothing became the one person who gave them everything they never knew they needed: hope. And in the quiet glow of Hawthorne Manor's garden, long after the cameras faded and the world moved on, a new chapter began, written not with fear or silence, but with courage and voice. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll just yet. Pause, breathe, and tell me, what part moved you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here more than you think. Did Ethan's silence break you? Did Amara's kindness inspire you? Did Charles's confession shock you? I'm reading every single comment. Yes, yours. If you want more emotional stories like this, hit the like button. It helps this message reach someone who might need it tonight. Subscribe to Hidden Tales Stories so you don't miss the next story. Every episode here is crafted to heal, inspire, and give you something to think about long after the video ends. Share this story with someone who believes in hope, healing, and second chances. And now I ask you directly, do you believe one person can change a life the way Amara changed Ethan's? Tell me in the comments. Your answer might change someone else's day.